Okay, so Don't Walk Run aka Captain Cringe has posted more anti-Yang videos. His latest video is on Andrew Yang not making the DNC debate, and Humanity First has debunked that one. I'll be focusing on Don't Walk Run's latest mischaracterization of Andrew Yang and automation. I've already debunked his attempt to downplay the automation of the trucking industry. He has since created a similar misleading video regarding the restaurant business. Don't Walk Run has become the Baghdad Bob of automation. If you don't know who Baghdad Bob is, he was an Iraqi newsman whose job it was to hide how the war was really going. If you don't know who Don't Walk Run is, I truly envy you. His straw man arguments and cringy antics, which apparently pass for comedy in right-wing circles, are responsible for the death of countless brain cells. Here is an example of the dishonesty we're dealing with. Here he is splicing a few seconds out of Andrew Yang's conversation with Joe Rogan. Andrew Yang is explaining that, while millionaires like Joe Rogan won't do anything with their freedom dividend since $1,000 more a month is nothing to them, the typical American will make good use of that money. Captain Cringe here splices a few seconds of that conversation and argues that Andrew Yang is admitting that Americans, in general, won't do anything with that money. Here is the excerpt from this guy.
As most people saved the rebate or used it to pay off debts. And in an interview with Joe Rogan, Yang admits that it will happen with the freedom dividend.
Like, if I gave you $1,000 a month, it probably would not make a big difference in the economy because it would just go into your account somewhere and, nothing would happen.
So what happens if people decide to save their share of the freedom dividend?
And now here it is, in context.
When you put money into people's hands, the money doesn't disappear. Like, if I gave you $1,000 a month, it probably would not make a big difference in the economy because it would just go into your account somewhere and, nothing would happen. But we all know that right now, most Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 57% of Americans can't afford an unexpected $500 bill. So you put $1,000 a month into their hands, it's going to go right back into the economy. They're going to spend it on food, childcare, car repairs they've been putting off, the occasional night out. And then all of those businesses end up hiring more people, and then we end up getting some of the money back as tax revenues. So of the $1.8 trillion, we're going to get back, let's call it $400 billion in new tax receipts because everyone's going to be spending more money. We're going to save $100 to $200 billion on things like incarceration and homelessness services and emergency room healthcare. I was in New Hampshire last month. And a prison guard said to me, this is a prison guard, he said we should pay people to stay out of jail because we waste so much money when they're in jail. Like, he sees all the waste in the system. So if you imagine a society where everyone's getting $1,000 a month, that's it's a great incentive to try and stay out of jail because, you stop getting it if you wind up in jail. And it reduces recidivism because when you come out of jail, at least you have, $1,000 a month waiting for you, and then you're less inclined to commit a crime and head back in.
Notice what a small window of time this guy had to splice in order to lie about what Andrew Yang was actually saying. So, in this latest video, he runs the same grift as usual. First, he mischaracterizes Andrew Yang's position on automation. Then he purportedly debunks this strawman version of this claim through a combination of non sequiturs, often simply implied and not even argued. Like always, he avoids big picture statistics and cherry-picks a few examples he thinks will make his case. And even with these cherry-picked examples, he still sees the need to mislead by way of omission. What's more is, these cherry-picked examples are instances of technology in its infancy. Imagine a naysayer at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution claiming that the agriculture industry had nothing to worry about because of the rocky beginning of the first few factories. Or, someone in 2001 saying brick-and-mortar stores have nothing to fear from e-commerce because it's too difficult to shop online. This is the game this guy is playing. So before we dig into these cherry-picked examples, let's look at the big picture. We are already seeing the adoption of automation in restaurants. Where several years ago we would have seen 3 or 4 cashiers serving customers, we now see 1 or 2 and the rest being done through kiosks. In non-fast food restaurants, we are seeing fewer servers and the adoption of tablets. I have especially noticed this in airports. Moving away from anecdotes, we have reports including the McKinsey report predicting that restaurants are one of the industries that will be most affected. For the record, Don't Walk Run used the McKinsey report in a previous video, although he misrepresented what it said. Oh, and you know who else is concerned that robots will displace fast food workers? Former McDonald's CEO, Ed Rincey.
Look at what's happening in retailing with Amazon. Automation and robotics are going to start replacing people, and they've got to become more efficient to make a profit. And there's too much invested in quick service restaurants around the world, across the United States. Too many dollars invested in fixed properties. Got to do something, and that something they're going to do is automate and try to reduce the amount of labor and labor content in all the products.
Yeah, it's really a big move. I see it all over the place. Newark Airport is, you see a restaurant that feeds 100 people, and you've got maybe 3 servers. They're runners between the kitchen and the tablet where you order. This is proceeding apace, I think.
Absolutely. I spent 3 hours yesterday working with a company called Lexicon on a virtual order taker hospitality automation, and it was magnificent. The thread of a smart device in your hand and being able to communicate with the restaurant on your order custom food, and have it delivered based on a code and paid for when you walk in the door is just, it's an incredible product. I'm working with a robotics company in California that's designed a system to make a standalone kiosk that serves hot, fresh food made instantaneously without any people involved except in the back of the house 30 miles away.
That's incredible.
It's an incredible revolution that's coming. The unfortunate part of all this is we're starting to lose the interpersonal relationships of kindness and good service and hospitality and the socialization that goes along when guys like you and I can talk over a beer.
That's very true. That is true.
And this gets back to what I keep saying. Forget what politically motivated people are saying, especially people whose paycheck requires them to cater to right-wing confirmation bias for Patreon dollars. Look at what industry experts are saying. People like Bill Gates, Elon Musk, and Mark Zuckerberg, among others, have been sounding the alarm for some time now. I want to make one thing clear before I get started. When I explain the realities of automation and refute arguments from people who are just here to make money catering to people's confirmation bias, I am not trying to be bleak. This is not some brouhaha on my end. We simply need to take problems like income inequality and now automation seriously and see these problems for what they are. Otherwise, we'll keep electing officials who either exacerbate these problems or at best, kick the can down the road. Point before I dissect this guy's misleading video. 15 million people are working in the restaurant industry. This is important because this guy will continue to bring up the 1 million vacant restaurant jobs, to argue that there's nothing to worry about. But if 33% of restaurant jobs become automated, we're talking 5 million jobs. So, do the math. And keep in mind, that the restaurant industry has served as a fallback for people who've lost their jobs in other industries. So as retail locations and manufacturing plants continue to close, some of those displaced workers will look to the restaurant industry, which itself will be shedding jobs. Okay, ready?
Here we go! Andrew Yang. You may have heard him speak about how technology and automation is going to wipe out American jobs.
My friends in Silicon Valley and my friends who work in technology know that what we did to the manufacturing workers, we are now going to do to the retail workers, the call center workers, the fast food workers, and then even bookkeepers, accountants, insurance agents, lawyers, and on and on.
The lawyers? How does your client plead?
Your Honor, my client pleads guilty to all charges.
Your Honor, no, it's I hit the wrong drop down. So, I'm not going to explore robot lawyers in this episode.
So, a few seconds in and he's already using a straw man argument. No one is saying that AI will represent people in court. In fact, court appearances aren't even the bulk of an attorney's billable hours. What AI is already doing is conducting much of the legal research and paralegal aspects of law practice.
I was an attorney for 5 months, which is long enough to know that you can automate away a lot of that job. And that's half a joke, but it's very real. Software can edit contracts more cheaply and effectively and accurately than any human lawyer can if you were looking at a volume of documents. So this is a problem that's going to affect everyone pretty quickly. And it's already transforming certain industries like finance and insurance who are replacing workers right now. I spoke to a group of 70 CEOs in New York City, and I asked them, how many of you are looking at replacing your back office clerical workers with artificial intelligence and software? Guess how many hands went up out of 70? All 70. The fact is you could fire whoever didn't have their hand up because their incentives are all around improving their bottom line. So if someone comes to them and says, hey, you can get rid of some of your workers and replace them with software, you have to do that or you'll be fired. That is the system that we have built. Our system is built around capital efficiency for these publicly traded companies. It is not built around our well-being. It is not built around our quality of life. That's why we feel the way we do.
And this brings me to a recurring tactic this guy uses. What automation is doing is replacing a certain number of hours of specific jobs, not taking on 100% of specific job descriptions. This means that a certain number of work hours become automated. So if 33% of a worker's hours become automated, you need 33% less of those types of workers to fill that job description. Sure, you could say that this frees up said worker to do something else, but that something else is likely something that another worker is currently doing. So unless demand is growing at a pace fast enough to match this increased redundancy, we're going to see a loss of jobs. And here's a hint, after 40 years of this trickle-down economics scam that's gutted middle and lower income earners and pushed all economic gains to the top, demand is at an all-time low because your average American is now living paycheck to paycheck.
In the United States, there are an estimated 3.7 million fast food employees working in 247,000 fast food restaurants.
Okay, so right away he's limited his alleged analysis to fast food workers and is leaving out the 11 million workers who work elsewhere in the restaurant industry.
It costs a restaurant thousands of dollars to recruit, process, and train new employees. And when a position is unstaffed after an employee quits or is terminated, the restaurant not only loses money, but also lost productivity.
This also means 30 workers who applied for and received these jobs. Jobs that are being automated as we speak. Also, keep in mind that many of these workers are leaving one restaurant to work for another restaurant. Also, this statistic isn't quite as alarming as it sounds because much of the turnover is due to seasonality of much of the restaurant business, as well as the fact that the fast food industry employs a large chunk of students whose availability are often seasonal.
And while high turnover is a factor, there is a shortage of workers in general. Take, for example, this 2018 New York Times article about the owner of a Subway sandwich shop who had so much trouble finding workers that he was forced to work behind a counter because he couldn't hire enough employees. In April 2019, the National Restaurant Association reported that there were 991,000 unfilled jobs in the restaurant industry.
And no doubt, the alleged lesson here is that the shortage of workers means that automation will do little more than close this gap between supply and demand for labor. However, the restaurant industry actually employs 15 million people and automation is set to replace far more jobs than this shortfall.
So if you're a fast food restaurant owner, why not just invest in robots or technology that will completely replace all of the workers? Unfortunately, they can't, because it's not a thing yet. But there is technology that is being installed in an attempt to compensate for an increasingly tight labor market. First, there's touchscreen kiosks, one of the supposed catalysts of restaurants eliminating fast food jobs. One goal of these kiosks is to cut down on the need for cashiers. This allows owners to place crew members in different areas of the restaurant: cooking, prep work, customer service, etc. In a perfect situation, every customer would use a kiosk to place their orders and make a payment, thus eliminating cashiers. But as you can see, we're not quite there yet.
So notice that this guy sets the goalpost to a world with zero cashiers and points to the fact that cashiers still exist, as a slam dunk rebuttal to his own straw man. But of course, this is not the argument. These restaurants now need far fewer cashiers than they once did. Between 1 or 2 cashiers and a few kiosks, they can do the work of what once required several cashiers. And that is the point. We need only look at the retail example. Stores like Walmart once had several cashier stands and one self-checkout. Now we're seeing the inverse in many stores.
Is the kiosk stealing jobs? No. Remember, there is a difference between a task being eliminated and a job being eliminated.
This is the argument I mentioned earlier. What is a job but a collection of tasks? If a recurring task consumes 40% of a worker's day becomes automated, then 40% of what that employee does no longer requires the worker in question. Yes, it frees up the worker's time, but it's freeing them up to do tasks other workers are currently doing. So you need fewer workers performing the job description, or at least fewer hours of their labor. So then either reduce the number of workers in that department or reduce their hours. So now we get to Don't Walk Run's cherry-picked examples, which he addresses with dishonest tactics. Each of these instances shows that a certain aspect of restaurant work can be automated. The kiosks show that much if not most of the cashier work can be automated. Flippy shows that the hours involved in hamburger flipping can be automated. Spice proves that meal assembly can be automated. In each of these instances, Don't Walk Run simply points out the other aspects of restaurant work, which aren't automated in that particular instance. But these instances show that much or most of the customer-facing work and much of the kitchen work can be automated. The only person arguing that 100% of restaurant work can be automated is the imaginary straw man that Don't Walk Run is refuting. Good job TWR, that straw man never saw you coming.
Since the food makers are hidden behind the scenes, they don't need to interact with customers. Instead, they can concentrate on making the food faster.
Which is exactly what the kitchen workers traditionally concentrate on. They do this in restaurants where there are also customer-facing employees, whose jobs are in this case, automated.
At the new San Francisco restaurant called Itza, don't look for servers or cashiers. They've been replaced by touchscreens.
Except that there are human employees in red shirts taking orders from customers.
We have no lines. When people come in, there is almost always an ordering station waiting available for them.
Sure, no line. Got it.
How much do you want to bet that this is a video of the restaurant's grand opening and not a typical day?
Now, the digital cubbies are just a novel method of streamlining the process of passing orders to the customer, as opposed to an employee calling out a name or number and handing customers over their food.
Don't forget they also take people's orders, collect money and hand them their change. This technology proves that restaurants can now, unfortunately, operate without this job description.
One night in 2018, Wow Bao received a visit from Andrew Yang.
This is a restaurant where we just order our food. It's all in the front of the house, and then they just come out. Actually, you gotta see over here. Come here, come here. They just get served in these
pods, it seems like.
So, a couple points here. Andrew Yang is saying that the tech is reducing jobs in fast food, using Wow Bao as an example. But Yang has no idea how many people are working behind the wall, or how many people work for the restaurant in general.
Here's a hint. It's the same number of people you'd normally see in a restaurant this size, minus the number of people who typically work in the front.
Flippy flips the burger when it's time to cook the other side, and then takes the burger and bun off the grill and places them on a tray. But it requires a human employee to place all of the food on the grill and to assemble the burgers. So Flippy isn't eliminating jobs, but for human employees, it's eliminating the repetitive task of flipping burgers.
Automating the burger flipping aspect of a job means hours of work that no longer require employee hours. When one employee flips the burger, they hand it off to another employee who then does the assembly. Flippy shows that the former can be automated.
Of course, not every restaurant can afford to implement Flippy, even if they wanted to, as the robot comes at a cost of $60,000 to start.
That's what business and equipment loans are for. And given the money employers save on hourly wages, training and otherwise processing incoming and outgoing employees, this investment will likely pay for itself within 2 years. And what happens when the cost drops to $40,000 and even $30,000?
You can find Flippy doing its thing at Cali Burger in Pasadena, California.
What this guy is admitting is that Cali Burgers are opening up everywhere, and we are seeing more Flippies. There is even a Flippy 2.0 which cooks French fries. Also, it looks like Cali Burger is also beginning to use kiosks for self-ordering.
It's not costing thousands of grill masters their job anytime soon. But then again, would that be a bad thing? No, it wouldn't. I'm not putting down fast food workers by any means. No one's dream job is to work behind the grill in fast food. You take it because you have to. With that said, if a viable replacement comes along and you can fill what is arguably the toughest position in fast food, the industry should welcome it with open arms.
This really is an odd argument. I guess that restaurant jobs aren't the most ideal jobs. Dealing with irate customers requires patience and composure. Working in the kitchen requires tolerance to heat and the ability to handle a stressful environment. Nevertheless, millions of people work these jobs, because that's what's available to them. I suppose if you've never had to work with your hands, it's easy to wave these jobs away as superfluous, but there are millions of people in the United States who depend on these types of jobs.
Then there's the coolest thing you'll see today, the robotic kitchen at Spice in Boston. Patrons customize what they want to put in their meal, then hoppers feed ingredients into these rotating woks. When the food is ready, it empties into a bowl. After cooking, the wok is automatically cleaned, eliminating the need for a human to wash it. But what about all the dishwashing positions? Think of the dishwashers!
You mean the 330,000 people employed as dishwashers? I don't know what world this guy lives in. Does he think that just because he won't work certain jobs that no one is willing to work those jobs? That certain people aren't dependent on this type of work?
The big problem, and we have a few problems, but like one major problem is that we're guided almost solely by GDP, stock market prices, and profitability. And the issue is that with AI and new technologies, those things are just going to keep on going up and up. Well, not the stock market. I mean, the stock market eventually is not going to stop going up. But GDP is going to keep going up, even as more and more Americans get displaced. You know, I mean, if you have like trucks magically drive themselves, that's like a boon to GDP, because you can get the same work done without having to spend all this money on humans. But is that going to be good for human well-being? In a lot of communities, it's going to be devastating for human well-being. So we need new measurements that actually correspond to human well-being. Things like median income and wealth, levels of engagement with work, mental health and freedom from substance abuse, childhood success rates, environmental quality, proportion of elderly in quality situations. So you can map these things and say, hey, like, we need to start driving our economy towards human well-being. We need to make the market serve us as opposed to having us all serve the market. Because if it's us all serving the market, we are going to be screwed. Because the market is going to zero out the truck drivers, it's going to zero out the accountants, it's going to zero out a lot of people upcoming. AI is just now hitting a point where it's going to be able to assume the roles of hundreds of thousands of call center workers and bookkeepers and a lot of other things that we have a lot of people doing right now. So we need to have new measurements for the economy that correspond to our well-being, and then start driving in that direction. And the great thing here is that this would free up these corporations to start doing things that help people. Right now, I know CEOs and board members, and they say, my hands are tied because I must optimize for one variable. Like
shareholder.
Yeah, quarterly profitability, shareholder value, like, which are tied together. So if there's something else, I can maybe get away with it for like one quarter. If things are going really well, I can like do something on the side and be like, it was good PR. So we need to fundamentally change the way that the goalposts are set up if we want to reorient towards an economy that will serve us in what is, again, the greatest technological shift in human history.
Yeah. The realigning of the goalposts is like, right now, this rock is so small, it takes 40 days to sail around this rock. And the geopolitical leadership is kind of overthrowing the we are one mentality. and the prioritization of markets is overthrowing the humanity.
Yes.
And these things being paired together, they're making the goalposts about money and about geopolitical leadership and ownership and control and things like that, which I think a lot of people are racing towards, but at the same time, it's putting a back seat on humanity, putting a back seat on the mentality of shifting the goalposts a little bit towards humanity. What would that do? How would that change the world for us? And you're also working on a digital social credit in that direction as well, which this is another really cool pillar. It acts as kind of you're doing some tokenomics here.
Well, so you have to look at the issues on the ground, because as a startup guy, I'm always like, okay, there's like the stuff in the boardroom and the the whiteboard, and then it's like what's happening on the ground. So what's happening on the ground right now is that, again, more and more American men are leaving the workforce, and men tend to deteriorate without work. I'll include myself because I'm a guy and I resemble this. The first thing we tend to do is play a lot of video games. It's like 75% of this now freed up time goes to video games.
And this is like a lost meaning or purpose in life. So now what do we turn to?
Yeah, if you're just an idle dude, like the progression seems to go by the numbers, because I'm a very data-driven guy. It's a lot of video games, which works well in your 20s, but then you start getting sad in your 30s. And then when you start getting sad in your 30s, you go to drugs, alcohol, self-destructive behavior, occasional violence and criminality, and early death. That's like the general progression without work.
Sounds fucking horrible.
By the numbers, this is a different situation for men and women. Idle women do not disintegrate into antisocial behaviors in the same ways. So you have to look at the ground floor and say, okay, hundreds of thousands of former truck drivers who now you're saying, okay, here's some money, but that doesn't solve the problem of what you do all day, because people need structure, fulfillment, purpose, work. So if we say to the market, being like, hey, market, value these people, it's going to be very, very difficult, because the market's like, I don't really need these people, at least the way the monetary market's set up. So what we have to do is, if you have these new goals for the economy, then you can say, you know what, if you nurture a child, volunteer in the community, help your neighbor, give someone a ride, repair a boiler, any of those things that move society's goalposts along, install solar panels, work on infrastructure, then we're going to reward you.
Time banking.
Time banking, yeah. It's based on a system called time banking that's in effect in a couple hundred communities around the country, where if you do something for someone, then you get a time dollar, and then you can say, hey, I got this time dollar, I can give it to you, and then you have to do something for me, and then someone's like, okay. So you create all these touch points in the economy that are independent of skill level. That is just anyone can show up and staff your garage sale or babysit your kid. There are different things that people can do, and then you tokenize those activities, you guarantee it, and as president, I will do this in 2021, you guarantee a monetary value, and you say, look, these tokens have real value. You bring them to a bank, we'll give you $1 for every 10 social credits. But the beauty of it then is that you will tax their redemption, and so people will not redeem it very often. What they'll do is they'll just build social credits, and then they'll use the social credits with each other. They'll go to businesses that will be rewarding positive behavior and want to be seen as hey, we love it when people volunteer in the community. So if you come here, social credits, and then they get your credits and trade it to the government. So there are all these things that can be done. And you can build this parallel economy around pro-social activities that's accessible for people at every point in the skill ladder. That is the vision. That's where we have to go. Because if we listen to the monetary market for too long,
they're not going to value these things like volunteering, and they're not going to value taking care of kids, taking care of elderly.
My wife right now is home with our 2 boys who are 5 and 2. She works harder than I do, and the market value of her work is